Greg here with Outdoors on the Cheap, and it's the day after, or of, I suppose, of an ice storm we had here in Nova Scotia. It's like February 5th or 6th. I'll put it up on the thing. I never know exactly what the date is. Anyway, it's rained for like 48 hours, and there's been freezing rain and so on and so forth. So right now, all the trees are covered in ice, and I was just sitting in the living room watching YouTube, thinking, boy, what a tough day to be stuck in the woods. And then I got to thinking, that wouldn't be a bad video. Let's simulate the situation where you're lost. You realize you're lost, and you know you've got a couple hours of light left before the whole world goes dark. That's about where I am now. It's around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, right? Got about 2 hours of light, give or take. Probably, and it's going to get really dark because it's overcast. There's going to be no moon, there's going to be no nothing, right? At least that's what it seems like. So you're in that situation. You got to get shelter, you got to get a fire. I mean, ideally, you've got a nice kit like this. Might be a little bag of tea in there, maybe some sort of high-calorie snack, a little metal bottle that you can boil water in, and so on and so forth. But none of that really matters because you're not going to die of dehydration or starvation in one night. Where I am here, what you're going to die of is exposure, right? So you got to get warm. You got to get sort of out of the weather a bit. You got to build some sort of structure that will give you some sort of heat factor in some way, and ideally a big fire. I mean, you really got two strategies: complete insulation, and then you've got the other strategy was build a big old fire. And for my money, building the big old fire is the better bet because it's heat. It's heat, it's safety, it's warmth, it's just the better way to go. But you got to know how to do all of that. And so that's the reason you come out on days like this where all the trees are covered in ice and that sort of stuff, and you practice your skills. You practice doing all of that stuff in the worst conditions possible. I couldn't think of a worse kind of day. Everything's wet and it has ice caked onto it. Terrible time to start a fire. On the good side, because we had an ice storm, there's a lot of fallen trees. So just before I turned the camera on, I actually gathered up some. So I'm going to start throwing together a little shelter, and then I'm going to get a fire going, and we'll see if we can pull that all off in a couple hours. All right, let's see what we can do here. Let's put the little kit aside. Now, I mean, I've got a folding saw, and really you should never be in the woods without something like this. But I thought, why not just simulate the situation where you don't? Most guys, the rule for hunting in Nova Scotia is you have to have something like a knife, and you have to have a means to start a fire, and you have to have a compass. I always have a knife and a backup knife, a way to start a fire and a backup way to start a fire, and a compass and a backup compass. But I also bring a good saw like this, right? And if you want to win one of these, all you got to do is subscribe to my channel. Once I get to 1,000 subscriptions, I'm going to give away 2 of these, Silky Gumboy. But anyway, all the details of that are in the description box. It's from the Newfoundland Knife Company. Check them out, Newfoundland Knife Company. I'll put the screen up, their name, website address on the screen. If you use my coupon code, you get 10% off. If you subscribe, you can win one of these for nothing. Anyway, let's get started here. So I've got a tree here that's sort of ideal. That direction is west. That's the direction of the prevailing wind. The direction your shelter is facing should be perpendicular to the prevailing wind so that the smoke is carried away, but you still get the radiant heat from the fire. This looks like a lean-to, but this isn't what I wanted. But I do have a nice crook in the tree. Use that. Now I got a couple trees here that look like they might bear the weight. I'm going to sort of test them out a little bit, just to make sure they got enough life in them to handle bearing the load. Here's another one here. This one seems heavy, but it might be brittle. So I'm just gonna test it out. All right, I think that's good enough. Now, if this was permanent, I wouldn't want to just, ideally you want to cut down something green and all that sort of stuff. I'm just using dead stuff that's lying on the ground. For your shelter, you don't need nice, dry sort of wood. Right, you just need thermal mass. So I'll put this up in the crook. What I'm shooting for here, and I'm trying not to kneel in the snow because you don't want to get wet knees. I'm trying to keep myself as dry as possible. but a kind of lean-to that's gonna have a bit of an overhang to keep snow and rain and stuff off of me. We can throw a whole bunch of wood over this, make a little roof. But there should be enough room for me to lay down here and get out of the weather, right? And this is where I'll sit, basically the highest point. I got a tree to lean on while I'm sitting by the fire. But don't need a lot of room, don't need height. Just need enough height to sit up, right? So because you can sit at the fire and tend boiling your water and all that sort of stuff. So I've got that part taken care of. All right, zoom out a little bit just so you can see what I'm doing from a process point of view. I'm actually going to double this up just in case. All right, just in case the beam I've chosen doesn't have what it takes, doesn't have the right stuff, I got a second one. Plan B sort of thing, right? Because you're in a rush and you're just using whatever goes and you're going by feel. You don't want to be messing around with stuff like that. All right, so now I can start laying stuff over top. So that's about a dozen fallen trees, all about 3-4 inches in diameter. Didn't need a saw, didn't need an axe or anything to gather them, but I'm not nearly done. I need a lot more than that to sort of create a reasonably weatherproof situation. I mean, with this sort of shelter, what you're trying to get is a place to sit where you've got a fire throwing heat on you and something that'll be warmed up by that fire. So you're creating a little microclimate around yourself. You're sort of sitting in out of the weather. There's a big fire here throwing heat at you. And the fire is big enough that you can sort of ride out the evening in that situation. So I need a lot more shelter first, right? So this thing can work the way it's supposed to work. So I'm gonna kill the camera, go gather some more trees. To gather these trees took me about, just so you have a sense of time, took about 5 minutes, maybe 10. There's a lot of fallen trees around here. I'm really lucky in that sense. If you were in a situation where you'd lost, you'd want to wander around for a bit until you found a spot that had a lot of materials. Fallen trees, because they're easy, and also standing trees that look dry, dead standing trees that you can push over and use for firewood once you get everything all set up. There's no point, some of you are going to say you should start the fire first. I am confident I can get a fire going relatively easily out here because I've put myself in this situation many times. And basically the fire is going to be right here where I'm standing, so I don't want all that smoke and stuff in the way. I'm really warm moving all this stuff around, so I just don't want that around while I'm doing all of this. It's better for me to spend whatever it takes, 30 minutes to an hour setting up this shelter than investing my time in the fire. So moving along here, and I've pretty much exhausted all the tipped over, fallen down trees that are on the ground that with a couple kicks they're not frozen in place and I can use. I got two choices now. I can start tipping over trees, or I can start searching farther afield for trees. So I'm tipping over trees because I'm gonna have to do that anyway to get firewood. because again, I'm doing this situation where I don't have something like this, that everything I use as firewood, it's got to be trees I just knock over that can be found, that can be used, that are there to be used. So that's an opportunity to gather firewood while you're gathering shelter wood. And how you tell the two, this is a perfect example right here. I got this tree that I just knocked over and this one. Okay, now this one weighs, but they're about the same size, but this one weighs more. So I know this has more water in it. So this one is for the shelter. I'll put this one aside over here as decent firewood. How much firewood do you need? As much as you basically, you get your shelter set up, you get your fire started, and then you gather wood until the lights go out. Right? You put everything you have into gathering wood. You should have, you know, I think for like -40, I think they say get a pile of wood the size of a car, and then get another pile of wood the size of a car. For around here, you know, maybe, you know, if you're thinking of logs that are like 8 feet long, dead spruce is pretty much what you can find here, so it's not the greatest firewood in the world. But you're going to want, you know, enough wood that you could put your arms around like this in 8-foot long lengths 2, 3, 4 times, really depending on how cold it is, right? You think if you've got a pile of spruce that's this big in diameter that you can get both your arms around, one of those might last 2-3 hours, right? So you got to go all night, sundown, let's say 6 p.m. give or take, from about till about 6-7 a.m. right? So you're going to need 4 times that for where I am here, right? And then maybe a bit, and then you just keep gathering, right? Because you just don't know how much you're going to need. Yeah, I'm going to keep gathering wood here, but just a point that, you know, once you get to that point where, remember, you're gathering wood for your shelter, but you're also gathering firewood, and so you're making those distinctions while you're walking around. You're making a note of the surroundings, looking for fire starting materials. I see a birch tree right behind the camera there. Looks dead, so I can strip the bark off it aggressively. You know, a live tree, if you strip the bark off it, it's not good for the tree, but if the tree's dead, you can just go to town, right? Anyway, I'm gonna gather some more logs. I'll check back within a minute. Just thought I'd show you something here. The project's coming along. It's taking a little breather. You know, it's really important to pace yourself and just sort of keep a steady pace. Don't take a frantic pace. And as you can see, I've peeled off my jacket and my toque. I got this little neck thing as a headband right now. I have a spare one of these in my kit. I usually have a spare one in my pocket too. But the good thing about this, keeps your ears warm, but it's so thin it's easy to dry out by a fire if I did need to dry it out. Anyway. Steady progress on this so far. You can see every one of these has just been broken off, and if you think that's just inauthentic, I just don't think you know much about the forest here in Nova Scotia. I didn't use my folding saw for any of this. You take a look around, there's just dead fallen trees everywhere, right? And some of them are pretty easy to get up off the ground. My rule is if I give it a kick and it seems to come loose, I'll pick it up. If it doesn't come loose when I pick it up, or it doesn't come loose when I kick it, I leave it. It's not worth blowing my back out on. Now, the point I wanted to make was, as I'm gathering this wood, everything out here, you can see how it's open and light. Okay, this has been exposed to the elements, and it's not to say that I can't find firewood out here, but the better firewood, look at this forest, look at the darkness. And I'm on the edge of this sort of thick, see how it's light, dark, so I'm sort of on the edge of this thick forest. This direction is east, so I'll sort of know when it's morning, I suppose. But more importantly, this is where you want to try to find your firewood, because it's protected. It's you know, not as windy. It's just a little bit. There's a dead tree right there. I don't know if I can get it down without a saw, but I mean, I would hazard to guess that's excellent firewood. Just a question of how rotten it is. Often when trees die, they rot near the ground because the ground's wet, so you can knock them over. It looks like a piece of that fell down, but that's probably rotten. Anyway, it's in here that I'll look for decent firewood to make a real fire. What unbelievable luck I've got. Despite everything having ice on it here, I've got a tree that is like dry as a fart. I mean, everything here is ice covered. And in this thick woods, I mean, here's a branch Yeah, right next door. There's a branch off a tree. I don't know if you can tell, but that's caked in ice. Okay? And that's 6 feet away. So I got this beautiful dry tree. And just as I said, it's rotten at the base. So I can knock it down. So that's a beautiful piece of firewood. Not only kindling, right, kindling, but also firewood. And this is about 25 feet from where I'm setting up camp. Pretty handy. A couple more trees like that around here. I'll see what I can do to gather those before I run out of light. All right, so I got a bit of a situation going here. You know, we still have light, and normally for bedding you'd use spruce boughs. You just pile them as high as you can. But all of the spruce boughs right now are literally covered in ice. So it'd be like sleeping on a bed of ice. At least with this dead wood here, there's an airspace underneath. I'll get a fire going. Some of that warm air can be underneath me, right? And I got this sort of semi-dry wood from a dead tree. And I thought I could just sort of lay it across here. Almost make like a kind of plywood, right? I mean, everything's trickier when the whole world is wet, right? I mean, this just matters where your torso is, right? Your legs don't matter so much, right? It's more about, especially at my age, I'm almost 50, it's more about, you know, you don't want to get all seized up. So this is not a soft bed, right? But by laying this, what was supposed to be my kindling, across here, at least I've got something, right, to give me a degree of comfort with my torso. I'll have to be relatively ingenious to find something to use like something like that to use as a pillow. I'm thinking punchy rotten wood is the way to go for a pillow. Some combination of that and maybe balled up birch bark. We'll see how things go. But I think here I've got, notice I'm trying my best to keep my pants dry. But this is okay. You know, I can lay down here. Right, I can get myself halfway comfortable. Remember, the whole point is just to make it through the night. And the main point of this structure is to allow the heat of the fire to heat me and to keep the wind from stripping the heat away from me. Right? It's basically a hearth. That's the idea anyway. Anyway, I can feel a bit of a breeze coming in from this side, so I'm going to stop that off, then I'm going to light a fire. Alright, so I'm running out of light here, so if I'm going to make a fire video, I got to make it now. So this is an adaptation of a long log fire where I've got, instead of having logs, which I cut down, I've got trees I push down. And it's rare you're going to find a tree you can push down that's, you know, more than 5 or 6 inches in diameter, which is the kind of trees I've got here. Some of these are a bit wider than that, or they were, but like pieces of them busted off, right? So anyway, what I've got here is a nice pile of birch bark. I basically have a pile of logs and a pile of logs, and then a wooden floor between them with a bunch of kindling type stuff. And then a big pile of birch bark. Okay, and then a whole bunch of stuff that hopefully will ignite to support the fire. And then the exercise beyond that is just to continue to gather wood and gather wood and gather wood and gather wood until the lights go out. When you're doing that sort of thing, the instinct is to bring the wood right to the camp. But really what's more practical, because you're basically going out in a radius, just finding what you can find, is to bring everything to within the distance you can see from the fire when the sun's down, right? Because you got to stay moving anyway for a good while, right? I mean, you're not going to get a good night's sleep. You're going to get some sleep. Once you know you've got a big fire that's going to last a while, then you'll get some sleep, right? So when the light goes down, you're still going to be processing wood, dealing with wood, bringing it into your fire, all that sort of stuff. So you want to get the firewood trees close enough so you can see them from the fire. Anyway, let's get some light going here. Let's get some fire going here. I got some wood that I think is dry enough to start fire with. We'll see how true that is as we go along here. Actually, that seems a bit, I don't really know how dry that is. Anyway, we'll get this going here and throw some stuff on it, see what we can make happen. I think we've got enough to get something going anyway, even though everything is very, very wet. All right, so here, you could, if you want to be as purist as possible, right, you can attempt to light the fire using ferro rod. It is very wet, less than ideal conditions for that sort of thing today. So my advice would be not to mess around with that sort of stuff. When you're in a survival situation, use your Bic lighter. But just for the sake of those people that, for whatever reason, think this is the only way a legitimate survivalist can start a fire, a legitimate survivalist always has a Bic lighter and always has more than one. But anyway, let's get going here. Just because you've got flame on your birch bark doesn't mean you can count on it to burn. Do not start. Look at that, it went out. As I said. To get your birch bark going when it's wet, you can't trust it completely. You have to really play with it a little bit. That's why I'm not moving it into the fire yet. I'm trying to get it really going good. Be surprised how easily it goes out, even when you think it's going really good. It's unreliable when it's wet. It burns when it's wet, but it's unreliable. Okay, now I can put that in the fire. Let's put the ferro rod in my pocket for now. Get the knife around my neck so I don't lose it. Okay, now I can tend my fire. Now we're going all in. Right, putting the birch bark on there, gathering it up in a nice pile. Our birch bark is basically our primary kindling. Now we're breaking up the finer stuff, which is wet. All right, I can feel it in my hands, the moisture in this wood. So I can lay it across this, right, sort of like a drying rack. Isn't it odd, the wind, when I set this camp up, the wind was going towards the camera there, now it's going the opposite way. But at least it's not going into my camp. I'm breaking this up in little pieces, hopefully they fall in the fire and they ignite. Yeah, all this wood's wet, so basically the fire has to ignite it, but it also has to dry it out. So we have to give the wood enough air space for the sort of air to get through, dry everything out. Some more birch bark here, stuff that underneath. Right now, this fire's not making any real heat, okay? And actually my hands are getting quite cold. from working with it. The exercise now is just one of adding stuff to the fire. All right, so I'm sitting in the little shelter here, and the fire is going. I'm running out of light here, so, you know, and my sort of time for being out in the woods is just about up. If I was staying here for the night, my work would be far from done. It would just be beginning. At this point, I would be gathering wood, throwing wood, adding wood, doing everything I could to get wood near this fire, drying wood out because all the wood's wet, getting it burning, adding to this fire. I'm sitting in this little lean-to right now. This fire is really not throwing out much heat yet because it's just not big enough to do that. We need to add a lot more wood to this fire for it to throw out the heat. But I'm out of the weather. I'm, for the most part, out of the wind. This fire, you read in your survival manuals, it's a stride away from the shelter. Okay. Luckily, I paced myself when I was getting things set up, so I didn't sweat through my clothing. That's very important. I could have gone faster, but then I might have sweat through my clothing, which is a terrible situation. But yeah, it's basically, okay, now the wind's going the way I expected it to go, right? Anyway, you can see I'm sitting in the shelter, and the wind's going in that direction, so I'm not getting smoked out while I'm sitting here. I'm picking up a little bit of heat from the fire right now, but it's still, this is nowhere near big enough for a warming fire. We have to add a lot more wood and get a lot more heat going. Well, we basically got the basics here. So there's the basic shelter, about a stride from the fire. There's about an hour of light left. That's a lot of time if you're industrious. It is not like airtight, basically, and I would keep adding to this until I ran out of light. But at this stage in the evening, the exercise is firewood, gathering more and more and more firewood. I have a place to lay down. I'm somewhat out of the weather. Because it's tilted like that, as things melt, instead of dripping straight down, it sort of just runs along. Some of it will drip on you, but you got your clothing and you got a big warm fire, and it won't be so bad, okay? Well, that's the general idea. You have a look at it from the back. I can continue to add to the shelter by the light of the fire into the evening once I've got all those materials gathered and brought near the shelter. I don't know how long this took to throw together. I left the house at 2:30 and told my wife I'd be home at 4:30. So, and I didn't use my saw for any of this. This is all just tipped over trees. Okay? Inside the shelter, right? There's another piece of firewood there. You're down nice and low, so hopefully when you're laying down you're not getting smoked out. Got a reasonably comfortable place for my torso, less comfortable for the knees and legs and boots, that sort of thing. It's not the Hilton or anything like that, but you get this fire going big enough. And I mean, all these things are relative to how cold it is. I think it's going to get down to -12 tonight. You got a good enough fire going, -12 isn't so bad. The amount of wood I got here, I need at least 3-4 times this amount of wood to make it through the night. On the good side, once you've got a big fire going, you don't need perfectly dry wood. Okay, you need a really good dry wood to get the fire started. It's moving a bit here because the smoke's sort of following me a little bit. And you need really good dry wood to get the fire started. Once it's started, you can use the fire. And actually, because I've got the fire, got some size now, I'd actually start laying logs this way, like a Siberian log fire. You lay the log, this is not a log, but you lay the log down like this, and as it burns, you just advance it, right? As it burns off, as the end burns off. So you can have the long log fire, and I'll also adapt it to being a Siberian log fire. And these are all things you're doing without a saw, without an axe, just making the best of it. I'm really sorry that I can't sort of continue this and do it into the evening overnight. I just haven't got the time today to do that. I haven't got the freedom, let's put it that way, to do that today. It would be really great to do the experiment and to see what it would be like to do the whole night in this situation and what would be left of me in the morning. And it's unfortunate, but I have to sort of call it quits. Anyway, I got to stop that fire out and call her quits. But a little fun in the woods, just playing with lighting fire in adverse conditions, trying to use the ferro rod in adverse conditions, throwing together a shelter in adverse conditions with minimal gear, that sort of thing. It's unfortunate that I can't follow the whole experiment through and, you know, use my life and well-being as a guinea pig, but I just can't do it tonight. Some other night, hopefully I can do that. It'd be a fun thing to try. Anyway, I hope you found that interesting. If you did, please like, share, subscribe, and until next time, enjoy the outdoors on the cheap. Thanks for watching.